like, think of how you're going to feel after having this conversation. Like in 5 years from now, and you look back on this, like I'm doing now, think of how you're going to feel if you're not true to yourself. Think of that, because right now you may be feeling uncomfortable, but if you don't say anything in 5 or 10 years, the regret will be immense.
Hey, before we dive into today's podcast, I wanted to share something very special with you. And you're going to want to hear this, and it's happening from now until July 15th. If you've been on the fence wanting to work with me in some capacity, maybe you've heard of my mastery coaching experience and you're curious about it, maybe your shit's coming up and you keep telling yourself you can't afford it or you don't have time, well, guess what? Now's the time when you're going to want to take action. We are doing a summer promo where we are going to gift you July and August. Why am I doing this? I'm doing this because I've noticed some interesting patterns with our children's behavior post-pandemic world, and also watching women burning out at an alarming rate. And I am not here for all or nothing strategies. I'm here for the long game. This takes time. This takes patience, and this takes consistency. And you need support. So if you don't have a plan on how you're going to reverse engineer how you want to feel in your personal and professional life, I want you to head on over to heatherchauvin.com/summer and check out our mastery coaching experience. Because if you apply before July 15th, you're going to be gifted. Yes, you're going to be gifted 2 additional months, which is over a $2,000 value. You can feel good and have your cake and eat it too. heatherchauvin.com/summer.
It was a calm morning on the lake. My friends and I were kayaking, enjoying the first nice day of the summer. We chatted about many things that morning, as most women do when they are catching up. But all I can remember is one moment, one particular part of the morning where I felt shock and confusion. In our conversation, I discovered that for the same service we all accessed, I was paying more. I remember hearing the amount of their fees, and I also remember their expressions when I told them how much I had been paying. We all stared at each other in disbelief, unable to offer an explanation that would make sense to any of us. How could we all be getting the same experience, but somehow my rate was higher? They wanted to know what I was going to do about it. Of course, the reasonable answer would be to say something and have an open and honest conversation about it. But I knew this was not going to be easy for me. How was I going to tell somebody I was disappointed, hurt, angry? How was I going to have that uncomfortable conversation? As a classic overthinker, I created scenarios in my head as to how it was going to go down. I thought of how I would feel in each situation and how that person would react. I ran through scenario after scenario, changing the approach and outcome each time. When I showed up the following day, I was nervous. I had a pit in the bottom of my stomach because I still didn't know how I was going to approach it. So I said nothing that day. I continued to put off the conversation because there was never a right time for it. And so I still said nothing. I said nothing because it was easier for me to disregard the way I felt than to hold someone accountable for their actions. I said nothing because I didn't want to hurt someone's feelings. I said nothing because I was afraid someone would be mad at me. I said nothing because I feared I'd have to make a change and I wasn't ready for that. I said nothing because I didn't believe it was worth it. I didn't believe my concern had value. I said nothing. Saying nothing left me feeling small, like what I had to say didn't matter. It made me feel like I had no control over the situation, and yet I had full control. Over time, I have learned that I never want to feel like I said nothing again.
Thank you. How did you feel writing that story?
It wasn't my original story. It wasn't the original moment that I thought of. But when I worked with Jesse to kind of uncover some ideas, it kind of came out, and I actually didn't want it to be my story. I didn't want it to define what I was going to say. But the more and more I looked over it, the more and more I realized that it's really an integral part of who I was, or who I have changed from being. And I really thought it was impactful. And quite honestly, it made me, like, when I read it out to her out loud, like, I couldn't finish the last couple sentences, because it really, the I said nothing was really powerful for me.
And what, so you and I have known each other for a little while, and this appears to be like the theme, right? Which is like, I'm curious, going in, what story, like, did you know going in what story you wanted to tell, or like theme or idea, or like what encouraged you to
this, like, the original story was about me, figuring out who I was again. Like, after having kids, like, all of my 30s was about having kids. And then I got to a place around 38 where I was just like, who am I without being like a mother, a wife, a sister, a friend, a teacher? Like, who am I? And I, went through sort of this turmoil in my life where I was figuring out, and I was pushing boundaries, and I was doing things that wasn't my norm, and what I mean by that is I was choosing myself, and it wasn't comfortable for people around me. And so that was sort of the idea that I wanted to go with, in terms of how I went through choosing myself and what that meant to other people, and, what it's like on the other side of taking that time for yourself.
I had a very similar experience actually a few days ago. I'm working with, I guess you could call her like a speech coach or someone, like somebody helping me write a keynote. And I told her the old me, the old version of me, the first time I wanted to like get on stage and speak, I was like, I know what story I'm telling. And like, I'm so fixated on that story. And then this time I kind of like let go and surrender to what was supposed to come out. Like, I know there's this desire to want to say something. I just don't know what that is. And I will know once it comes out, but I can empathize with that like messy middle where you're like, no, not this, like, this isn't the story. And yet the message or the theme is still there.
Yeah. And it actually, I think it really relates, because it, in terms of saying nothing, for so long, I sort of just followed the flow of what maybe was expected of me or what needed to be done. And, just was messy with my kids, did whatever my parents wanted, my husband wanted, my friends wanted. And then I got to a point where I was like, I don't even know what's going on anymore. I just felt not me. And so I think it very much relates in this particular story when she asked me to write down all of the times where, I felt like I wasn't being true to myself. Like, this stuck out because it was so apparent to me that I was not choosing me.
So let's talk about knowing when you don't feel like you are yourself. So I think, this is a perfect example of defining good, right? Like, good mother, good wife, good person, good teacher, give, like, and losing that sense of self. How do you know when you're like, I'm not me? How does one identify with that? Like, what were those breadcrumbs for you?
I think I just started to become resentful. I started to not feel good about all the things that were happening. And I craved time for myself. I craved being able to dedicate time to do the things that I wanted to do. And so it was just like a gut feeling that I needed to do more for me. And I don't know if that, sounds selfish, but it was something that I just couldn't ignore.
I just think it's funny that we have to throw that in.
I know.
Sounds selfish.
Yeah, absolutely. Just as a side note, taking the time for myself was about, working out and, and moving my body, making me feel good. And somebody asked me, what is your why? Why do you do this? And it really was hard for me to say that I do it for me.
Yeah.
Like, that I just do it for me, and I don't do it for my kids or my husband or my, future grandchildren or my parents. I do it for me. And the trickle effect of that is that everyone else benefits from it, but it really is just for me. And it took me a long time to be okay with that, because I felt so selfish that I'm not doing this for my children, or I'm not doing this for somebody else,
I think there's like the actual side effect of like, yeah, I feel great. And then you see the secondary side effects, which are like, oh, when I feel good, I'm more present or I'm more focused. And it's okay to start a why, right? To get you moving for somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
I get, like, again, we are born and bred nurturers. And it's so interesting to me how we feel guilty for wanting a sense of self.
Absolutely.
But when you get there and you arrive, or you have those tiny, tiny moments, because of course we all have moments of that clarity, and then boom, like we're back into other areas.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting how when you get that, you're like, oh, this is like a bad thing. Like, I don't deserve this. I'm not allowed to be here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So Adriana, you're a great example of a woman who, what I've witnessed, now this is where I'm going to make you emotionally uncomfortable.
Okay.
I've witnessed you with this intense sense of curiosity, because you and I have been on this journey where I'm like, oh, how do you like get the motivation to work out? Like, you love that shit, or you appear to love that shit, or you're like, you're more in it than I am, or I'm like, oh, this is my resistance. This is my resistance. And speaking my truth, or like whatever, being like, that's not serving me. That's easy for me at this point in my life. And so we've been great collaborators in that sense. And you've inspired me in many ways. And I've watched you, just because you're not like, I'm not going to say the silent type, but you're the passive observer who's like doing the work. You're like doing the work behind the scenes, and you don't need to be like, look at me, right? And this determination that I've witnessed inside of you to get your voice back, to like really take a stand, because you take the action and the contrast comes back to you. Someone's like, I don't like that. And it's like, you want to go back into I'm not going to say anything, but constantly you're like, all right, what do I do here? How do I chip away at this? And I so admire that in you, because a lot of people won't do that work. They're like, how can I get from point A to point B without feeling any emotional discomfort?
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, it's an identity. Like, you were probably like that as a child. And then you're just like, how do I get my voice back?
Mm-hmm.
But I love that you could feel that resentment. So let's go back to the moment. You're overthinking, you're hurt, you're angry, you've discovered something. You're like, how the heck did I get here?
Mm-hmm.
We're all in the same room. This is not equality. Like, what is going on here? And then having this story that you don't want to hurt someone else's feelings. You don't want to make them uncomfortable, when it appears that they did not care about your feelings.
Right.
How did you process that? How long did it take you to like confront that emotional discomfort?
I think for me, I get uncomfortable with those confrontational conversations, because I feel that I clam up and I can't really express myself in the moment. And so I avoid them until I have clarity. But sometimes my avoidance, it's like a habit. I said nothing, and then it just continues to get easier to say nothing. And then it sort of goes away, that intense feeling of, sadness or anger. You just kind of let it go, because is it really worth it in the end? And I think it's an attempt by me to control a situation, to control the outcome, to control how somebody's going to feel about something. But yet I cannot control how somebody thinks about the situation, or how they act in the way that I address it. And so had I addressed it sooner, I would have been acting in integrity with myself. I may not have liked the outcome of it, but perhaps it would have been the outcome that I needed, and I wouldn't have seen it at the time. And yet I hung on and continue to not feel 100% satisfied just because it was easy and it was comfortable and I still enjoyed it. It just, there was still sort of, a little bit of a tarnish on it now because I had to endure this and I wasn't going to say anything. And I think no fault to the other person or, the other people, but we teach people how to treat us. And so these people were acting in a sense of how I've shown them how to treat me. Well, this person won't say anything. They'll go with the flow. They'll continue to just act as normal. And so I showed them that I would do that. And that is the issue, that I'm showing somebody how to treat me.
Mm-hmm. And so you've taken that responsibility. You're absolutely. Like, how did I get myself here? Yeah. It's way easier to blame the other person. So absolutely. What you're bringing up for me is a conversation that I have a lot, or I've had recently with people around partnerships, or for me, very apparent in my life is raising a teenager. So how we believe, first of all, we believe we're entering confrontation, and people will say, I don't like confrontation. I very much dislike confrontation, but I don't get in confrontation ever. Mm-hmm. Even if I feel mistreated by somebody, I never feel like I'm in confrontation because, again, like you said, it's a habit where I'm like, I just got to face it because it keeps me up at night because I'm like, oh my God, this is so uncomfortable because mm-hmm. I cannot engage with that person without talking about the huge elephant in the room. Mm-hmm. So exactly what you said, people are like, this is so overwhelming for me. So I'm just going to back off. I'm going to avoid this conversation. And I'm like, 2 minutes, tap into it. Like 2-minute rule, just tap into it, right? Atomic habits, just like it's a habit. You're like, hey, let's talk about this. Like 20 seconds of insane courage, vomit, poop your pants. Mm-hmm. Boop, let's talk about the pink elephant in the room. And then you're like, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit. How did you feel on the other side of the first initial conversation?
So the conversation came out through a phone call, and I wanted it to be in person because I much prefer seeing, somebody's reaction. But like I felt a sense of calm, like I had gotten what I had to say out. But it really didn't come out in hindsight in the way that I wanted it to and how I wanted to let, these people know how I was feeling. It was more like a little step, like, oh, guess what? This happened. Can we do something about it? And then it was sort of skirted over, but I said it. So I wouldn't say that there was a complete resolution to it in the sense that I said what I was going to say and they heard me and my needs were met kind of thing. But still saying something made me feel 10 times better. And
so you could feel the bubble of like resentment. You release it, right? You like energetically take action, even though it was imperfect, messy action. Absolutely. And then you had the sense of calm, which is like, wow, that's alignment. Okay, I'm headed in the right direction.
Right. And I think it's about like practicing saying no, or saying, I don't like that, or let me think about it, over and over and over again. And then it gets easier, like just like your example of going to the gym, like how do I get up and do that every day? It's just become who I am now because I do it every single day or, multiple times a week. And so if I continue to practice being authentic with myself and being in alignment with who I want to be, and even just in scenarios where it doesn't really matter much, like a friend asks me to go out and I want to say yes because I want to make them feel good, or I think I should. That's a practice to say, no, it's not what I want to do. It doesn't make me feel good,
100%. What I'm picking up on is it's again, developing that courage muscle. Mm-hmm. And then as you do it over and over again, you have more capacity. You become less and less reactive and living in like the people pleaser. And you start to live in let me think about it. And then you can be proactive instead of reactive.
I find that like, I'm so quick to say yes to things. Somebody sends a message and I'm like the first one. yep, I'll be there without really even thinking about it.
Mhm.
And I'm learning to take a step back. I don't have to be the first person in line. I don't have to be that cheerleader all the time. I can be that silent observer, like you said, and sit and pause for a few moments before I make the decision that makes sense for me.
Mhm. Yeah, my, I guess, habit that I had to undo was the rescuer. I'll fix it. I'll fix it
Mhm.
for you. I'll save you. I'll rescue you. And being on the other side of that, like it's the tendency still there. It's just not very reactionary, has come with a lot of guilt and shame. And I was like, well, that's really the wound. Like, that's really what I'm trying to avoid, because if I fix, then I don't need to feel the guilt. If I fix or rescue, I don't need to feel the shame. If I fix or rescue, I don't need to feel the fear.
Mhm.
So yeah, we just like keep decluttering, and it's like, oh shit, that's really what's in there.
That's really what it's about. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's move forward and talk about you deciding you wanted to be on the podcast,
Hmm.
because I'm all about, even me, I will tell you, people come into my world, whether they're a client or a friend, I can see possibility. I see, of course, I'm not emotionally attached to people's shit. So I'm like, oh my gosh, like I just see it and we never see it in ourselves. And the old me, even in my business, I'm like, you can lead a horse to water, but you cannot get them to drink, right? And I'm like, I'm done. Like, I want to work with people who are willing to see their own brilliance, even though we all need a sense of belief and we need that cheerleader and that coach. But I can't come 90 and the other person come 10.
Mhm.
I'm not referring to you at all. What I'm saying is, tell me the story that you told yourself that held you back from even putting yourself in the ring.
So you sent out the message, I don't know, 4 months ago, I'm opening it up, girls, who wants in? And I thought, I do, but I don't have a story. Like, I don't have this monumentous event that happened in my life that is going to even be valid to be part of this, and I don't mean it to say like, I didn't have an illness, I didn't have a tragedy, I didn't have this huge trauma in my life that I felt I needed to talk on this podcast.
Yep.
But I was like, I want to do it. Like, I want to talk. I want my voice to be heard. I want to put myself out there. I want to be uncomfortable. And, that little stress that gets you moving in the right direction. And then I started listening to everybody's stories. And I thought, okay, these aren't traumatic events. I mean, some definitely are. Some are very sad and lots of things. And but I just thought, I can do this. I have moments, I have stories, and I want to do this. And so I just signed up. And I thought, if I don't sign up, I'm never going to be ready to actually do it. And I know that when I have a deadline, I will meet it. I don't know how I will get there yet. I don't have the plan, but it's going to happen. I know that I'll be ready on the day.
Yeah.
And that's what I did. So I signed up, and then I made the appointment with Jesse to kind of hash out what I truly wanted to say. And that was it. And I just didn't look back.
I love it. So for those people who don't know Jesse, so I love to give the space to my clients first, because one, I think we're all aligned with storytelling, and we're just aligned with values because you're within the community. And then Jesse is somebody in the community that helps with storytelling. And I think, to me, even just doing that process is so therapeutic. Like, I remember having to write story after story after story when I was writing my book. And by the time it got published, I really didn't care. I was like, I feel like that was therapy on steroids. And I just ran a marathon. So I'm curious, how did you feel as you were going through that process to dig?
So it was an hour, and I didn't know, I wasn't confident that I was going to come out with a story. I'm like, how am I going to come up with this? What is going to come out? And it was really just about journaling. Let's journal on this feeling. And what are the things that come up as you journal. And I think she gave 20 minutes and I only had 6 points. And I thought, oh God, how am I going to create a story out of this? But she picked it out. She said, that is very, very powerful.
Yeah.
And then I had more time to just hash it all out and create a draft. And it happened. Like in that time, it came out and I went in not feeling confident that I was going to come up with a story and almost nervous, but it was perfect.
So
and
you know
I knew that it was the right one.
Perfect. I love it. You're like, is this good? I'm like, yeah, it's good. And I didn't give you much information.
I know, like, Heather, you can't just like it. You have to say something to
I'm
me.
like, good. Yep. And then you're like, are you ready? What else do you need from me? And I was like, oh yeah. Oh yeah. Bring it. I love it. When people are like trying to overthink, I give them less information and it drives them crazy. And I'm like, yeah, this is, we're going to be emotionally uncomfortable. You're like, damn journey. But it's like when we actually just show up for life in the uncertainty and the unknown, that's exactly like your little micro example of, I had a desire. I tell people all the time, like there's desires inside of you. If you have a desire to run a marathon, if you have a desire, or you're like, no way, I would never do that. Like the desire is planted inside of you for you. So if you're like, I would like to be on the podcast, that's a desire. You get to choose when you want to act on it. Then you decide to say yes. You put that emotionally uncomfortable deadline there, and then you show up to do the work to get to where you are. And you have to let go of the outcome. You have to, because if you're like, well, how, that is literally your brain trying to control the outcome. And the more you ask how, I'm like, calm the fuck down. Like the more people are like, but how exactly am I going to get results? How exactly? I'm like, you're just not ready. Like I could tell you everything, but you're never going to feel safe or secure, which is part of the issue, which is why you will not get your desired outcome, because you actually don't have enough trust. You can be emotionally uncomfortable and say, this process is uncomfortable for me. But if you're trying to control the outcome, it's just not going to turn out the way you wanted it to.
Yeah, you just have to show up. I mean, I used to be, these are the order of the things that I have to do to get to my goal. But now it's just consistency. Like, this is what I'm going to do every day. It's going to be uncomfortable, but I know it's going to allow me to work towards the places that I want to go. And I'm keeping, my power, because I have all of the power to control how I feel and the decisions that I make, and not give that away to anybody. Does that make sense? Like,
yeah, I think you remembering that you have the power is the power.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think really taking a stand to say, hey, my story is worthy of being heard, and then taking that action to kind of vote for that person you want to become, which is, I'm going to get on the podcast, is taking a stand for the bigger message here, which is like, hey, I have a little voice inside of me that there's something off and I want to be heard. And the more and more you do that again and again and again and again, we've talked about this, the courage muscle, then you are there going, you know what? I actually always thought it was my husband who never let me use my voice, or my children, or school, or the system, or whatever it is. And you're like, no, I've just like tampered it down and never voiced it.
Yeah, I've allowed those excuses.
Yeah. And I see this all the time with people. Actually, today I was recording a few little videos on like how to say no and how to ask for what you need. Like, how many times do we like think this other person knows exactly what they want or what we want? And then we're like, why aren't they just doing this for me? I'm like, that's actually exhausting. Like, I love it when people are like, hey, can I talk to you about this? This felt weird. And I'm like, thank you so much, because it's annoying to be like, what's going on over there? Our relationship feels off. Like, that drives me insane.
Yeah. Yeah, it's about the stories I think that we tell ourselves about what's going on around us and how we think things should happen and how we want someone to behave in accordance with what we're doing, in a sense to validate our story that we're telling ourselves, that we're making up basically in our head. I think, I don't know where I read it, but 90% of the things that we tell ourselves never come true, right?
Probably even more.
Probably even more. And so, even in this situation, overthinking each scenario, how it was going to turn out, how I was actually going to approach it, this and that. You can't. That's exhausting in itself. And it's almost like I'm tired from doing that. I don't even want to do it anymore. I'm going to just not think about it, go in with a level head. And like you said, it's not about, in certain cases, confrontation. It's just your voice being heard. And no blame, like this is just how I feel, and how can we resolve this sort of issue. But yeah, stories are such a big deal, and that's a huge thing for me, in terms of overthinking, and definitely working on that.
And I just want to point out the aspect around like, I don't have a big grand story. I hear this from people all the time. And unfortunately, I do have a big story. And I say unfortunate because I don't want people to have a big story in order to take back their power, feel in alignment with their life. Like, we're like just waiting. We're just waiting until that big thing happens and going, okay, check, I can check the box. Like I talked about that in my TED talk. I was like, why my TEDx talk? I'm like, why was I all of a sudden like, okay, suffering box is complete. Or, people like, oh, I'm so blessed. I've seen things like, I'm so blessed. I'm so privileged. I can't take away from other people. Or it's like, listen, if we actually all said like, I am worthy, I matter, like, and doing that from a place of how can I be of service to somebody else by telling my random story.
Mm-hmm.
I truly believe that's how we're going to change the world. Like, I think quote unquote, ordinary people, everyday people need to start speaking up more and saying, I'm worthy of having that 10-minute break. I'm worthy of going for that walk. I'm worthy of like, let's just start at basic human needs. We don't have to go to like the bigger things. Like, let's get the courage to just start with like, I'm going to bed. I need space. I'm putting my phone away. I'm taking a day off. And then we can boom, 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 get the courage to go up, because it's fascinating to watch and observe how we opt out of certain things, although they are always desires that we have because we think we're not good enough. Mind blown.
Yeah,
so,
really.
Adriana, now I'm going to make you more emotionally uncomfortable.
Oh, geez. Okay.
The vein is getting bigger and
I
bigger.
know, the vein is getting bigger.
I'm just kidding. I just like to preface things with that. But
Okay.
what are the, let's call them like emotionally uncomfortable goals that are inside of you right now that may feel tangible or intangible? You're like, wouldn't it be nice? What are those other little things that you want to, or big things that you may want to lean into in your future?
Okay. Wouldn't it be nice? I think surrounding like this kind of conversation, it would be nice if I stopped listening to my stories. If I just always went with my gut, so I'm working on that with you, working on that with just being mindful of how I feel and what makes me feel good. And I want to continue to start choosing that path of what makes me feel good. And so, I'm not sure if this is where your question is headed, but I enjoy helping others. Like, I enjoy seeing people thrive. I'm a teacher, and I love when my students don't think that they can do something, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh wow, like I believe in myself. You're helping me to believe in myself or see my potential when I never saw the potential in myself. And so in like this journey that I've been on in like health and wellness and taking care of myself and seeing the benefits of those, people start to see, and they start to ask questions like, how are you doing that? And it's funny because I can tell when somebody's asking now if they truly want to make a change or if they're truly just asking to say something. And they do also want to make a change, but they're not there yet. Like they are not ready to take that 10 minutes or take time for themselves or go for a walk or go to sleep early. They're just not ready for that. So I would love to be able to like sort of work somehow in that field. And so I started to take like this nutrition course because I really think that for me, nutrition was the biggest thing. And so I want to kind of just sort of creep in that direction. Still I'm a teacher by trade and I love what I do, but on the side and in my spare time, I want to be able to do that. I don't have the whole picture yet. I'm creeping, taking baby steps, maybe taking slower steps than I should, but just sort of exploring what I'd like to do outside of my everyday tasks.
I know most people are like, I know I'm moving slower than I'm supposed to. But the funny part about that is that goes back to that classic turtle and the hare, right? Story of how the turtle was like slow and steady. And then the rabbit went really fast and burnt out. And I see it all the time where you're willing to follow the breadcrumbs. You're like, what is that? Okay, and the letting go of the plan. Like we need a plan. We have to have some action or momentum, but perfection, no, it doesn't exist because you're going to be like, oh, good. I took this course. I love this. Ooh, then I found out about something else.
Right.
And now that brought me over here. And then eventually getting the courage to like monetize or whatever that looks like. Like, again, you don't have to be attached to that. So I love that. And taking it back a few steps.
Okay.
When you were talking about, curious, like, oh, these people are curious. I can tell when people are curious versus someone's just saying something like, so you can feel the energy of someone is open and curious versus someone who's just like locked down and closed off. And then you said, I want to, I enjoy sparking hope and possibility in people. It brings me so much joy when I see them do that, which is exactly my thing too. We can do it in helping different demographics, but it's the same thing. Like you light up like a Christmas tree when someone is like, oh my gosh, I feel possibility now. And you're like, yes, yes, yes. So you're a perfect example of like doing the work before, like you were leading and becoming. And if I didn't do the work on myself, you would never have been that little curious.
Right.
Curious.
Like, what they're doing.
What is that?
I know. I think I asked you for months. What do you do exactly? What's going on over there? Yeah, I was always wondering. And I had a completely different idea of what it was that you did.
What did you think I did?
Well, no, I just was like, I thought it was just for people in business. I thought it was just somebody who's starting a business works with Heather. And that was my idea. I didn't think that it was even about personal development and working on yourself and habits and all of that.
I know it's mind blowing because people will say like, yes, I do work with people in business in our mastery business program. And then I work with people in mastery who are like, I'm here for the personal development. And what I often find sometimes is people who are like, I'm here for business. I'm like, personal development is business development. Like, yes, you need to know marketing and sales and all of that. But if you have a hard time, it's just all intertwined, right?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, you were so curious. And I was literally watching you like energetically just get closer and closer and closer. And then I remember one day I was like, when you're ready, you'll be ready. Like you'll ask or something. And you're like, what the heck? Like, it's like, you're so close. You have the parachute on.
Yeah.
But you're not in the plane yet. You're like, what the fuck? And I'm like, when you're in the plane, come back to me. And you're like, what does that mean? But it's funny. But you know what, as a recovering rescuer, to be able to identify that and say, wow, like, because sometimes people will say, and I'm sure they do to you, like, oh, I'm curious, but they're curious, but they're not ready.
Right. And I valued that actually a lot, that didn't push anything, because it wouldn't have mattered if you tried to get me to start something and I wasn't ready for it. It would have failed miserably. And that's the same thing when people are asking me questions. I know if they're ready or not, if they're really willing to make a commitment to themselves, and how you have to start slow. Somebody cannot go from 0 to 100 and 0 to 60, whatever it is, in a week. Everything that we've developed in terms of habits has happened over years. It's not, oh, I've only worked out for a few months and I feel great and I look this way. This is like a 7-year process and ongoing, in anything that you're doing. So everyone's just looking for that like quick fix. I want to be fixed right now. And that's how you know when they're ready or they're not ready.
And sometimes we want the quick fix or the quick win, and that's okay too, because
Sure.
I personally feel like sometimes we're just trying to get that buy-in. Like, I need a quick hit to prove to myself that change is possible.
I can do it.
And then once you get that, then it's like, oh shit, now this is the next level of, I need to commit to a lifestyle shift or a mindset shift or an identity shift.
Right.
Yeah. So what would you say to that? I was going to say younger version of you, but going back to the moment, in this moment when you were in this story, the story that you shared today, like what would you say to that woman that was very afraid to speak her truth? What does she need to hear?
I think she just would need to hear that, like, think of how you're going to feel after having this conversation. Like in 5 years from now, and you look back on this, like I'm doing now, think of how you're going to feel if you're not true to yourself. Think of that, because right now you may be feeling uncomfortable, but if you don't say anything in 5 or 10 years, the regret will be immense. And I think a lot of it, the fact of not saying thing is about wanting to feel connected and wanting to be, a part of something. But the more you don't speak your truth, the more you're not authentically connected and the more you are, moving away from yourself.
Yeah.
So
I love that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Where I love it when people reach out, and I know you don't have a formal business, but people can follow you on Instagram.
They can.
So tell them your @ symbol so they can send you a message and say, I listened to this.
Yes.
And this is what I took away from it.
Okay. So I have an Instagram. It's called @cup. So CUP .of cup of Dree.
Love it. Love it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Heather.
There it is. You just listened to the Emotionally Uncomfortable podcast. If you want to take this conversation to the next level, head on over to our private Facebook group community, heatherchauvin.com/Facebook. My last name is spelled CHAUVIN. That's heatherchauvin.com/Facebook. Also, if you are a huge fan of this show, please rate and review it on iTunes. Every review helps another woman like you take back control of how she wants to feel and become emotionally uncomfortable. I truly believe the better we feel, the more alive we become. This is how we are going to change the world. And if you've been watching me for a while, if you've been on the fence and you're curious, how can Heather help me? Head on over to heatherchauvin.com/work with me to check out my mastery and mastery business coaching programs. That's heatherchauvin.com/work with me.